We know you paid the $450,000, my mother said. But your brother does not want you at Christmas, so do not come. I simply said. All right. They thought they were punishing me. They did not realize I had prepared a consequence they could not unwrap. When the relatives learned whose money saved the house, the holiday burned. I slid a folder across the table. This time, you live with the consequences. My name is Aurora Rodriguez and I am 32 years old. I am a senior forensic risk analyst at Harborline Analytics, a title that usually means I am the person they call when a corporation realizes their numbers do not add up, and they are terrified of what the answer might be. I spend my life sifting through the wreckage of other people's financial disasters, locating the exact moment a bad decision turned into a catastrophe. I am the calm one. I am the fixer. I am the one who keeps the lights on when everyone else is running for the exits. It was the first Tuesday of December, and Minneapolis was disappearing behind a curtain of white. From the 24th floor of the almost empty glass building where I worked, the street lights below looked like blurred stars drowning in a frozen ocean. The office was silent, save for the low, rhythmic hum of the heating system battling the sub-zero temperatures outside. I liked the silence. It was predictable. It was orderly. It was everything my family was not. I was finalizing a report on a mid-sized logistics firm that had hemorrhaged $2 million in suspicious vendor payments when my phone vibrated against the mahogany surface of my desk. The sound was a harsh insect-like buzz that cut through the stillness. I did not need to look at the screen to know who it was, but I looked anyway. The message was from Mom. It read, "Call us now. It is important." My body reacted before my brain could process the words. My stomach dropped. A physical sensation of weightlessness followed by a heavy, sickening thud. My pulse spiked. In the lexicon of the Rodriguez family, the word important never meant that someone had won an award or that they just wanted to hear my voice. Important was code. It meant money. It meant crisis. It meant Ethan. I stared at the phone for a long moment. The screen went dark, reflecting my own face back at me. I looked tired. My hair was pulled back in a severe bun that had started to loosen around hour 10 of my workday. I took a breath, the kind I used before delivering bad news to a client, and I dialed. They answered on the first ring. Aurora. My mother, Carol said. Her voice was on speakerphone. I could hear the hollow echo of the kitchen in Rivorton, a space I knew better than my own apartment. "I am here, Mom," I said. I kept my voice even. "Is everything okay? Is Dad there?" "I am here, Aurora," my father Martin said. His voice was deep, carrying that familiar tone of authoritative gravity he used whenever he was about to ask me to clean up a mess he had made. There was a pause. Felt heavy, staged. Usually, these calls began with a frantic preamble, a rush of panicked explanations about unexpected bills or medical emergencies or bad luck. This time, the silence was different. It was not the silence of panic. It was the silence of a rehearsed script. We were going through the mail. My mother started. She sounded almost casual, which was the first warning sign. "We found some papers from the bank. The ones regarding the mortgage status." My hand tightened around the phone. I had instructed the bank to send all correspondence regarding the foreclosure intervention directly to my address in Minneapolis. But banks were bureaucratic beasts, and mistakes happened. "We know you paid it, Aurora," my father said. He did not sound grateful. He sounded surprised. And beneath the surprise, there was a strange prickly layer of defensiveness. "We know you paid the $450,000 to clear the arrears and the principal." I waited for the next sentence. I waited for a thank you. I waited for a moment of relief, an acknowledgement that I had stepped in 3 months ago when the foreclosure notice was taped to their front door and pulled them back from the edge of homelessness. I had decimated my savings, liquidated my investment portfolio, and paused my own life to ensure they kept theirs. It is good that it is handled, my mother said, as if I had simply remembered to take out the trash. It is a relief. Thor, you're welcome, I said. The words tasted like ash, right? My father said, clearing his throat. We appreciate the help. We do. But that is actually not why we needed you to call right this second. I turned my swivel chair away from the computer screens facing the wall of glass in the swirling snow. If the $450,000 was not the headline, then something worse was coming. What is it? I asked. My mother sighed. A long trembling exhalation that usually signaled she was the victim of a situation she had created. It is about Christmas. Christmas? I repeated. Yes, she said. We have been talking with your brother. Ethan has been doing a lot of thinking. You know how much pressure he is under right now with the new startup. The investors are breathing down his neck. He is barely sleeping. I knew about the startup. I also knew that the startup was the reason they had second mortgaged the house in the first place, funding his visionary ideas that never seemed to manifest into actual profit. I said nothing. I let her fill the silence. Anyway, my mother continued, her voice speeding up slightly. Ethan feels it would be better, you know, less complicated, if you did not come for Christmas this year. The words hung in the air between Minneapolis and Iowa, suspended like the snowflakes outside. I blinked. I felt a strange delay in my processing, as if the sentence was in a language I did not speak fluently. I'm sorry, I said. Can you repeat that? Martin took over? We need to respect your brother's leadership on this. Aurora. He is hosting this year. He feels that having you there would create unnecessary tension. He is in a fragile place mentally. We need to prioritize the family piece. So this year, just sit it out. Don't make it awkward. I sat very still. The office was 68 degrees, but a chill seemed to radiate from the receiver of the phone, moving up my arm and settling into my chest. Let me make sure I understand this correctly, I said. My voice sounded terrifyingly calm, even to my own ears. It was my professional voice, the one I used when I was explaining to a CEO that his CFO had been embezzling for 5 years. You are telling the daughter who paid your $450,000 debt to save your house that she is not welcome at Christmas because my brother feels uncomfortable. It is not about the money, Aurora. My mother snapped, her tone shifting instantly from apologetic to accusatory. Why do you always have to bring up money? This is about feelings. This is about family dynamics. Ethan feels judged by you. He feels like you look down on him because his timeline for success is different than yours. I do not look down on him, I said. I look at the balance sheets. My father said that is exactly the attitude he's talking about. You are cold. You are analytical. Ethan is an artist. He is a visionary. He needs support right now, not your judgmental staring across the dinner table. I closed my eyes. I thought about the wire transfer I had authorized 12 weeks ago. I thought about the years of skipped vacations, the extra shifts, the freelance consulting gigs I took on weekends to build the safety net that I had just deployed to save them. I thought about the countless times I had bailed Ethan out of jail, out of debt, out of relationships he had set on fire. Always quietly. Always without credit. He is hosting. I asked. In the house I paid for. It is our house. Aurora. My father said sharply. You helped us out with a loan and we will pay you back when the market turns. But it is still our house and Ethan is the eldest son. He is taking charge of the holiday. We need to support his confidence. Support his confidence. The phrase echoed in my head. They were asking me to vanish so Ethan could play the role of the successful patriarch in a theater built on my financial ruins. So the answer is no. I said you are uninviting me. We are not uninviting you. My mother said, her voice wobbling with that weaponized fragility. We are just asking you to give us space for Ethan. If you love us, if you care about his mental health, you will understand. It is just 1 year. Do not be dramatic. I opened my eyes and looked at my reflection in the dark glass. I saw a woman in a silk blouse and a tailored blazer. A woman who commanded respect in boardrooms full of aggressive men. A woman who could spot a fraud from 3 fiscal quarters away. And yet to the 2 people on the other end of the line, I was nothing more than a utility. I was a resource to be mined when needed and kept when inconvenient. I waited for the anger. I waited for the tears that used to come when I was 20, or the desperate bargaining I used to do when I was 25. I waited for the familiar urge to explain myself, to list my sacrifices, to beg them to see me. But nothing came. Instead, I felt a small distinct click in the center of my chest. It was the sound of a door locking. It was the sound of a machine shutting down. For 32 years, I had been playing a game where the rules constantly changed to ensure I lost. I had thought that if I just paid enough, if I fixed enough, if I was good enough, I would eventually earn my seat at the table. But I realized now, staring at the frozen city, that the seat did not exist. Aurora. My mother asked, the silence stretching too long for her comfort. Are you still there? I am here, I said. Well, Martin asked. Can we count on you to be reasonable? I took a breath. The air in the office smelled of ozone and floor wax. It smelled clean. All right, I said. My mother paused. She had been ready for a fight. She had her counter-arguments lined up. Her guilt trips loaded in the chamber. My acquiescence threw her off balance. All right, she repeated. Just like that. Just like that. I said. I understand. Ethan needs to feel like he is in charge. You want a peaceful Christmas without me? Noted. Well, my father said, his voice relaxing into relief. Good. I am glad you are finally seeing the bigger picture. We will miss you. Fourth, we can do a video call on the day. Maybe open presents over the phone. No, I said. I do not think we will be doing that. What do you mean? My mother asked. I mean that I will respect your request completely. I said I will not be there. I will not make it awkward. I will not be complicated. You want a Christmas without me. You have it. There was a beat of silence. They sensed something was wrong, but they could not identify it because I was not yelling. I was not crying. I was matching their tone perfectly. Okay. Well, my mother said uncertainly. That is mature of you, Aurora. We knew you would understand. I understand perfectly, I said. Good night. Mom. Good night. Dad. I ended the call before they could say anything else. I placed the phone face down on the desk. The silence rushed back into the room. But it felt different now. It was no longer just the absence of noise. It was the presence of a decision. I stood up and walked to the window, pressing my palm against the cold glass. Below me, the city went on about its business, indifferent and alive. Thousands of people were down there, rushing home to families, to warmth, to obligations. I thought about the $450,000. It was a number that would take me a decade to recover from. It was the down payment on my own freedom, which I had voluntarily handed over to keep a roof over the heads of 3 people who had just told me I was not welcome under it. They thought I was simply agreeing to stay away. They thought I was the same Aurora I had always been, the reliable one, the safety net, the one who absorbed the impact so they did not have to. They did not realize that by cutting me out, they had severed the only tether holding them to reality. I looked at the snow falling relentlessly against the glass. A forensic analyst does not act on emotion. She acts on data. And the data was irrefutable. I had been operating on a false premise for my entire life. I had treated their love as an investment that would eventually mature if I just kept contributing capital. But it was a Ponzi scheme. It had always been a Ponzi scheme. If I am expendable to them, I whispered to the empty room, my breath fogging the glass for a fleeting second. Then why have I treated them like they are not? I turned back to my desk. My computer screens were still glowing, filled with spreadsheets and risk assessments. I sat down. I did not pack up my bag. I did not go home to my empty apartment. Instead, I opened a new file. I had work to do. But for the first time in my life, the work was not for Harborline Analytics and it was not for the Rodriguez family. It was for me. The lock had clicked shut. Now I had to decide who was locked out and who was locked in. Riverton, Iowa was the kind of town that looked beautiful from the window of a passing car, but felt like a cage once you turned off the engine. It was a landscape of peeling paint and Friday night football games, where the cornfields pressed in tight against the edges of the suburbs as if trying to reclaim the land. Our house on Sycamore Street fit the aesthetic perfectly. From the sidewalk, it was the picture of the American middle class with a manicured lawn that my father mowed religiously every Saturday morning, and a fresh coat of beige siding that hid the rotting wood frame beneath. Inside, however, it was a different story. Inside, we were always one bad month away from a total collapse, living in a state of chaotic improvisation that my parents disguised as a bohemian lifestyle. To understand why I answered that phone call in Minneapolis with such terrifying calmness, you have to understand the architecture of my childhood. It was built on a foundation of two distinct blueprints, the one for my brother Ethan and the one for me. Ethan was 2 years older than me. From the moment he could hold a crayon, he was labeled gifted. He was full of potential. He was the golden boy who needed every advantage the world could offer because his destiny was simply too big to be contained by a small town in Iowa. But with that label came a heavy, unspoken caveat. Ethan was fragile. His genius was treated like a rare orchid that required a specific temperature, expensive fertilizer, and constant pruning to bloom. If he failed a test, it was because the teacher did not understand his unique learning style. If he quit a team, it was because the coach was stifling his creativity. On the other hand, was never called gifted. The words attached to me were different. I was tough. I was so responsible. I was their little adult. These were not compliments. They were strategic assessments. They were the words you used for a draft horse, not a racehorse. A draft horse does not need special feed or a heated stall. A draft horse just pulls until it dies. The indoctrination began when I was 8 years old. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, my legs barely reaching the linoleum floor. My mother, Carol, dumped a shoebox full of envelopes onto the table. They were bills. Electric, water, credit cards, the mortgage statement. She laughed. A nervous, fluttery sound that I would eventually learn to associate with impending financial doom, and slid a clunky gray calculator toward me. "You are so much better with numbers than I am, Aura," she said, pouring herself a glass of wine, even though it was only 4 o'clock in the afternoon. "Math just gives me such a headache. It makes the lines blur. Can you help me sort these? Just put them in order of which ones have the scary red letters on them." She treated it like a game. We were playing Office. But as I punched the numbers into the calculator, watching the total climb higher than the figure I had seen in her checkbook ledger, I felt the first heavy stone of anxiety settle in my gut. I did not know what bankruptcy was, but I understood subtraction. I understood that when you took a big number away from a small number, you ended up with a hole. And it was my job at 8 years old to stare into that hole. So my mother did not have to. By the time I was 10, I had graduated from sorting mail to managing the household inventory. I remember standing in the fluorescent glare of the local grocery store, clutching a crumpled list my father had scribbled on the back of a napkin. I knew exactly how much money was in the debit account because I had checked the balance over the phone while my parents were watching television. The number was $74.13. I pushed the cart down the cereal aisle. I wanted the box with the honey and the bee mascot. It was $4. I reached for it, my mouth watering slightly, but then my eyes drifted to the item next on the list. Protein powder for Ethan. Ethan had just started varsity track, and the coach said he needed to bulk up. My parents had nodded solemnly, as if the coach had prescribed life-saving medicine. The protein powder was $22. I stood there for a long time doing the mental math. If I got the cereal, we would be over budget by $3 at the checkout. The card would decline. The cashier would look at me with pity. My father, waiting in the car because he did not like the stress of shopping, would sigh and ask why I had not been more careful. I put the cereal back. I grabbed the generic bag of oats from the bottom shelf for $99. I put the expensive protein powder in the cart. When I got home, my mother unpacked the bags. She saw the protein powder and smiled. "Oh, good. You remembered. Ethan really needs this for his energy." She did not notice the oats. She did not ask why there was no cereal. I had solved the problem before it became a problem. And in the Rodriguez household, invisible labor was the only kind that mattered. The pattern solidified when I was 12. It was a humid July afternoon and a delivery truck pulled up to the driveway. My father walked out, beaming, and wheeled a brand new mountain bike out of the back. It was a metallic blue Trek bike with 21 gears and shock absorbers. It cost more than our monthly grocery budget. Ethan ran out, whooping with joy. He had been complaining that his old bike was embarrassing, that all the other boys in the neighborhood had new ones, and that his social standing was suffering. I stood on the porch watching. My own bike was a rusted hand-me-down from a cousin with a seat that would not stay up and a chain that slipped every time I pedaled uphill. "Dad," I asked. He looked up, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Isn't it a beauty? Your brother is going to tear up the trails on this thing." "It is nice," I said. "Can I ride his old one?" Martin laughed, clapping a heavy hand on my shoulder. "That is the spirit. Rora, you are such a good sport. You do not need all the bells and whistles, do you? You are tough enough to handle the clunkers." I took Ethan's old bike. It was too big for me. The crossbar hit me in the stomach every time I stopped, and the brakes shrieked like a dying animal. But I rode it. I rode it without complaining because I had already learned that complaining was a luxury tax I could not afford. Ethan was the investment. I was the overhead. You pour money into investments. You cut costs on overhead. High school was where the divergence became a canyon. For Ethan, everything was an investment in his future. SAT tutors, an investment. Basketball camp in Chicago, an investment. A trip to tour colleges on the East Coast, an investment. My parents drained their savings accounts and maxed out their credit cards to pave a runway for him, convinced that once he took off, he would lift us all into the stratosphere. For me, success was not an investment. It was an expectation. When I brought home a report card with straight A's, my father would glance at it and nod. "Good job, kiddo. Keep it up." There was no celebration, no dinner out, no reward. Why would you reward a car for starting in the morning? That is what it is supposed to do. I got a part-time job at the library when I was 14. I used my own money to pay for my AP exam fees. I bought my own clothes from the thrift store downtown. My parents saw this not as a sign of their negligence, but as proof of my resilience. The defining moment, the one that carved the wound so deep it would eventually cost me $450,000, happened late one night during my junior year. I had come downstairs for a glass of water. The kitchen was dark, lit only by the glow of the stove light. My parents were sitting at the table, speaking in hushed tones. They thought everyone was asleep. I stood in the hallway, freezing in the shadows. "We cannot afford both," Martin was saying. "The transmission on the car is shot." And Ethan needs that prep course for his finals. If he does not get his scores up, he won't get into the business program. I know, Carol whispered. Her voice sounded thin, stretched to its breaking point. But what about Aurora? She asked if she could go to the debate nationals. The entry fee is next week. There was a long silence. I held my breath, my heart hammering against my ribs. I wanted them to choose me just once. I wanted to be the priority. I wanted them to say that I had worked hard, that I deserved a chance, that my potential was worth betting on. Ethan needs every edge he can get, Martin said finally. He is sensitive, Carol, if he feels like he is falling behind. He crumbles. He needs to know we are backing him 100%. He could really be someone if we just push him over this hill. But Aurora, Carol started, then trailed off another silence. Then my father delivered the sentence that would echo in my head for the next 15 years. Aurora's strong, he said. She will be fine. She always figures it out. I walked back upstairs without the water. I lay in my bed, staring at the cracks in the ceiling. I did not cry. That was the night I realized the truth about my family. They did not neglect me because they hated me. They neglected me because they assumed I was unbreakable. My competence was my curse because I never crumbled. They never felt the need to shore up my foundation because I never asked for help. They assumed I did not need it. Aurora is strong. She will be fine. It was not a compliment. It was a permission slip they signed for themselves to ignore me. By the time I was 15, I was effectively running the house. I knew the due dates for every utility bill. I knew exactly how many days past the deadline we could go before the late fee kicked in. I knew which credit card had enough available balance to cover groceries, and which one was maxed out. If I forgot to remind my mother to pay the electric bill and the lights got shut off, it was a lesson. Martin would lecture me about responsibility, about how the family relied on me to keep track of things because mom gets overwhelmed. My failure was a moral failing. If Ethan forgot to study for a test and failed, it was a crisis. The house would go into emergency mode. My parents would call the school, blame the teacher, hire a tutor, and bake his favorite lasagna to cheer him up. His failure was a tragedy that required community support. The house itself began to reflect this dynamic. The front porch step had a loose board that rotted through during a wet winter. My father put a caution tape over it and said he would fix it in the spring. Spring came and went. We just learned to step over it. The faucet in the upstairs bathroom dripped incessantly, a rhythmic torture that stained the porcelain rust orange. We just closed the door so we could not hear it. As long as the roof did not actually cave in, everything was fine for now. That was the family motto. Fine for now. I was the loose step. I was the dripping faucet. As long as I kept functioning, as long as I kept getting good grades and paying my own way and fixing their spreadsheets, they saw no reason to invest in me. They only fixed things that were broken. And I made the fatal mistake of never letting them see me break. Standing in my office in Minneapolis, 17 years later, watching the snow bury the city, I realized that the phone call I had just ended was not an anomaly. It was the inevitable conclusion of the algorithm established in that kitchen in Riverton. The $450,000 I had wired them was just the grown-up version of the cereal I put back on the shelf. It was the AP exam fees I paid myself. It was the rusted bike I rode so Ethan could shine. They were canceling my Christmas because once again, Ethan was the fragile orchid that needed the perfect environment, and I was the draft horse that could sleep standing up in the snow. They assumed I would be fine. They assumed I would absorb the blow, rationalize it, and keep pulling the cart. Aurora is strong. She will be fine. For the first time in my life, the words did not make me want to work harder to prove them right. They made me want to unhitch the wagon and watch it roll backward off the cliff. I looked at the computer screen, the cursor blinking on the blank document. I was not just an analyst. I was a forensic auditor. My job was to look at a chaotic set of data and find the narrative hidden within the numbers. And the narrative of the Rodriguez family was clear. They had leveraged my strength to subsidize Ethan's weakness. They had socialized his risks and privatized my profits, then taxed me to cover his losses. It was a bad business model, and like any bad business model, it was sustainable only as long as the primary investor, me, remained ignorant of the returns. But I was not ignorant anymore. The investor was pulling out. I sat down and began to type. I was not writing a report for Harborline Analytics. I was drafting an itinerary. If I was not going to Riverton for Christmas, I had to decide where I was going. And for the first time, the destination would not be determined by what my family needed. It would be determined by what I wanted. The draft horse was done pulling. When I graduated high school, I received a full academic scholarship to a state university in Des Moines. It was not prestigious, but it was a 4-year free ride. I had worked tirelessly for it, spending my weekends at the library, while Ethan spent his learning how to network at parties. When I told my parents the news, my father nodded. A quick, satisfied tap of his chin. "Of course you did," he said. "You are smart. That is great news. Aurora saves us a bundle." There was no party. There was no cake. My achievement was not celebrated as a victory. It was logged as a cost-saving measure. It was just another expectation met. Another expense I had successfully removed from their ledger. 2 months later, Ethan received his acceptance letter. It was to an expensive private business program in Florida, a school known more for its golf courses and sunny skies than its academic rigor. The reaction in our house was seismic. My father, who had just told me a month prior that he could not afford to fix the transmission on my car, took out a home equity loan to cover the out-of-state tuition. My mother threw a massive backyard barbecue. She invited the entire neighborhood, half the church, and relatives I had not seen in years. A vinyl banner was hung across the garage, flapping in the humid Iowa wind. Florida-bound congratulations, Ethan. I spent that entire Saturday grilling hot dogs for 50 people, the smoke stinging my eyes. I listened as my father clapped Ethan on the back, his voice thick with pride, telling anyone who would listen that this was it. This was the beginning of the family legacy. My aunts and uncles crowded around my brother, pressing $20 bills into his hand, whispering about how proud they were that the Rodriguez name was finally going somewhere big. No one asked me about Des Moines. In college, I lived on a diet of instant noodles and the cheap hot dogs from the cart outside the economics building. I held down 2 jobs from 8 until noon. I worked at the university library, shelving books in the silent, dusty stacks from 6 o'clock until midnight on weekends. I waited tables at a diner, the smell of grease and stale coffee clinging to my hair when I walked home. I was managing a full course load, sleeping maybe 5 hours a night. And for the first time, I was hoarding my own money. I was building a wall. The first crack in that wall appeared during midterms week of my sophomore year. I was in the library basement surrounded by textbooks on macroeconomic theory, my brain numb from statistics. My phone vibrated. It was Carol. "Aurora. Honey. Thank God you picked up," she said. Her voice was high-pitched, a frantic bird-like sound that signaled she was trying to minimize a disaster. "I have a tiny emergency." I leaned my head against the cold concrete wall. "What is it, Mom?" "It is just the electric bill." Completely slipped my mind. "You know how I get. And your father's paycheck is a little tight this week. And Ethan needed new tires for his car just this once. Honey. It is $300. They sent a final notice. I will pay you back on the 1st. I swear." I looked at my own bank balance on my phone. I had exactly $423 earned at $650 an hour plus tips. It was my food money for the rest of the month. "I will send it," I said. "Just this once," she repeated, the relief in her voice making me sick. "You are a lifesaver, Aurora." Just this once became the hook, the line, and the sinker. It quickly became a silent, steady drain. It was a $150 overdraft fee because my mother balanced her checkbook with hope instead of math. It was a $200 speeding ticket Ethan got, which he conveniently forgot to tell our parents about until a warrant was threatened. It was a lapsed car insurance payment because my father decided paying his bar tab was more urgent. These were not life-altering sums. Not at first. They were small fires, little emergencies that always seemed to ignite a day before my paycheck hit. With every transfer I made, I told myself it was temporary. I told myself that once I graduated, once I had a real job, I would set firm boundaries. I told myself that they just needed a little help to catch up. But I was an economist. I understood incentives. The safety net I provided was not a bridge to stability. It was a hammock. It removed all consequences. It stopped them from ever having to learn how to stand on their own. Why learn to balance when there is always a soft, reliable place to land? I graduated summa cum laude. My parents and Ethan came to the ceremony. Ethan complained about the humidity and the length of the speeches. We went to an Applebee's afterward and they drove back to Riverton. 2 weeks later, I accepted a junior analyst position at Harborline Analytics in Minneapolis. I packed everything I owned into my 10-year-old Honda Civic and drove north on Interstate 35. I moved into a 400-foot studio apartment with a cracked window that faced a brick wall. It was the most beautiful place I had ever seen. It was mine. It was quiet. I was finally truly on my own. This, I told myself, was the beginning of my actual life. That illusion of independence lasted exactly 28 days. The phone rang late on a Sunday night. It was Carol. She was not frantic this time. She was whispering, which I learned was infinitely worse. Aurora, are you alone? I sat up in my single bed, the city lights reflecting faintly off the brick wall. What is wrong? Mom? We got a letter today from the bank. I did not know who else to call. Her voice broke. A calculated theatrical shatter designed to pierce my defenses. I am listening. It is the mortgage. Honey. We are 3 months behind. They are starting the foreclosure process. They are going to take the house. Aurora. We are going to lose the house. The quiver in her voice was not just fear. It was a perfectly aimed weapon. It hooked directly into that 8-year-old girl at the kitchen table. The girl whose job it was to fix things. I looked around my tiny, peaceful apartment. The brick wall outside my window suddenly felt like a tomb. I did what I was trained to do. I analyzed the risk. I asked for the documents. I stayed up all night cross-referencing their statements and saw the truth. It was not just the mortgage. It was the home equity loan for Ethan's tuition. It was the maxed-out credit cards. They were drowning. I liquidated the small stock portfolio I had started with my graduation money. I drained my emergency fund. I covered just 1 month and the late fees. I bought them 30 days. But the next month, the crisis was still there. Ethan's revolutionary app was still in beta testing, which meant he was still draining their accounts for marketing and development costs. The emergency became a holding pattern. The new finish line. The magical solution to everything became until Ethan's big deal hits. We just need you to cover the interest. Aurora, my father would say. His voice firm. As if he were discussing a business plan. Just until Ethan's big deal hits. We are so close. The investors are lining up. This refrain echoed for years. I was promoted at work. I became a senior analyst. My salary grew. But my apartment did not. I never moved out of that tiny studio. I never bought new furniture. I never went on vacation. Every dollar I saved, every bonus I earned was diverted to the black hole in Riverton, just to keep the water from rising past their necks. Family gatherings became a surreal performance. We would all be at my parents' house for Thanksgiving. The table groaning with food that I had paid for with a discreet transfer to my mother's account. And my relatives would listen. Wrapped as Ethan explained blockchain synergy and angel investors. He was the visionary. He was the one making big moves. I would be sitting in the corner listening to the Wi-Fi router beep as it rebooted. I knew it was rebooting because I had just logged into the ISP's app on my phone and paid the 2-month overdue bill from under the table. So Ethan's slick presentation on his laptop would not lose its connection. The words thank you evaporated from my family's vocabulary. They were replaced by something far more insidious. You are so reliable. Aurora, my mother would say, patting my arm. Her eyes glancing past me to watch Ethan hold court. We just do not know what we would do without you. They said it with the same casual, thoughtless affection one has for a dishwasher that always starts. They said it like you would praise a sturdy bridge for not collapsing. I was not a person to them. I was a utility. I became a student of their failure. I learned how to negotiate with credit card companies, arguing for lower interest rates. I learned the precise language of hardship programs. I knew the names of 3 different debt collectors at the agency that handled my father's defaulted medical bills. I was managing the complex, failing financial portfolio of 2 irresponsible adults and their delusional son, all while holding down a 60-hour-a-week job analyzing the risks of Fortune 500 companies. The realization did not come in a flash. It seeped in slowly like rot. It crystallized one Tuesday night in my studio. I was working late. Of course. On my left monitor was a complex spreadsheet detailing the asset risk for a major client in Chicago. On my right monitor was my own personal spreadsheet, the one I used to track the endless bleeding artery of my family's finances. I stared at the 2 screens. The client spreadsheet was clean, logical, and solvable. My family spreadsheet was a chaotic mess of desperation mortgage payments, car loans, payday loan interest, funds for Ethan's marketing budget, bail money for Ethan's DUI. I was treating my family like my most critical, high-risk client. A client I could not fire. A client who would never pay. I was their unpaid risk mitigation department. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. The problem with being the reliable one, I realize, is that you are only visible when you fail. As long as the lights stay on, no one ever thinks about the infrastructure. I finally had to admit the truth. In this system, in the corporate structure of the Rodriguez family, I was not the daughter. I was the plumbing. I was the electrical grid. I was the load-bearing wall. You only notice infrastructure when it breaks. You do not thank it for working. You just turn on the lights, flush the toilet, and expect the building to stand. That was the night I stopped thinking of it as helping. I started thinking of it as an audit, and I knew sooner or later, an audit always leads to a reckoning. It was a Tuesday in September, about 15 months before the Christmas phone call, when the voicemail arrived that changed the equation permanently. I was in a quarterly review meeting, my phone on silent. When I checked it an hour later, there was 1 missed call and 1 voicemail from my mother. It was not her usual call me tiny emergency message. This one was just 4 seconds long. It was not even words. It was a sound. It was the sound of my mother trying to breathe while sobbing. A choked wet animal noise of pure terror. It was not the sound of someone who needed a few hundred. It was the sound of someone who was drowning. I excused myself from the meeting, my blood turning to ice water. Called back. No answer. I called my father. No answer. I called Ethan. It went straight to voicemail. His mailbox predictably full. I drove the 4.5 hours from Minneapolis to Riverton in a state of cold clinical focus. I did not speed. I did not listen to music. I just drove. My mind running through every possible worst-case scenario. Had someone died? Was it a medical emergency? But my gut knew. This was not blood. This was red ink. I did not even make it to the house. I could not. I needed the data first. I pulled off the highway at a brightly lit 24-hour gas station just outside Riverton. I parked under a flickering H halogen lamp, took my laptop from my bag, and connected to the station's unsecured Wi-Fi. I logged into their bank account, the one I had been subsidizing for years. The balance was negative $243. I logged into the mortgage portal. A bright red banner screamed across the dashboard. Foreclosure proceedings initiated. I clicked. I read. I went cold. They had not paid the mortgage in 3 months. That was the trigger. But the hole was so much deeper than I could have imagined. Years ago, my father had refinanced the house during a housing bubble, pulling out equity to invest, which really meant to cover Ethan's mounting debts and their own lifestyle. The new interest rate was variable and had just reset, nearly doubling their payments. On top of that, the property taxes for the last 2 years were unpaid. The county had placed a lien on the house, and then I saw it. The final fatal blow. The second mortgage. I had not known about the second mortgage. It was new, taken out just 8 months prior. I clicked on the details, my hands starting to shake, not with fear, but with a terrible seismic rage. It was a $100,000 loan from a high-interest predatory lender. I did not need to ask what it was for. I knew it was the seed money for Ethan's can't-fail venture, the one that was always just about to land a massive investor. I did the math right there in the driver's seat of my Honda. The smell of diesel fumes and stale coffee hanging in the air. The original mortgage arrears. The predatory second mortgage. The tax liens. Penalties. The late fees. It was not a leak anymore. The ship had already sunk. They were just waiting for the wreckage to be claimed. I closed the laptop, my breathing shallow. The number I had calculated stared back at me from the darkness. $450,000. I drove the last 2 miles to Sycamore Street and walked into the kitchen. It was exactly as I had pictured. My mother was at the table, her face swollen and blotchy, staring at a pile of unopened red-stamped envelopes. My father was pacing the linoleum, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, his face a sickly gray. And Ethan was standing by the counter, drinking a glass of orange juice, vibrating with an angry, self-righteous energy. It is not a big deal, he was saying as I walked in. I am telling you, this is just a cash flow issue. The pitch deck is done. We are meeting with a new VC group next week. They are going to buy out the first investors and we will be flush. He saw me and his face hardened. Oh, great. You called her. What did you do that for? Now she is going to get all analytical and negative. He still had no idea. He thought this was about his pitch deck. I dropped my car keys on the counter with a loud clack that made all 3 of them jump. There is no VC group. Ethan, I said. My voice was flat. I have seen the loan. It is not an investment. It is a hard money loan with a 22% interest rate, and you defaulted on the first payment. He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing. Aurora. My mother whispered, her voice a ready thread. They are taking the house. The letter says we have 30 days. I sat down at the table opposite her and opened my laptop again. I turned it around so they could all see the screen. You do not have 30 days, I said, pointing to a line item. You had 30 days. That notice was issued 3 weeks ago. You have less than 1 week before the bank auction. I am not a real estate lawyer, but this is a non-judicial foreclosure. They do not have to take you to court. They just have to file the paperwork. And they have my father stop pacing. He leaned over the screen. What does that mean? It means that at 10 a.m. next Tuesday, your house will be sold on the courthouse steps to the highest bidder. And based on what you owe, you will be left with nothing. Less than nothing. You will be responsible for the difference. Carol finally broke, her head collapsing onto her arms in a fresh wave of noisy, desperate sobs. Martin looked like he was going to be sick. Ethan, however, slammed his hand on the counter. This is ridiculous. We can declare bankruptcy. That stops it. Right? I saw it on TV. You cannot declare Chapter 7 bankruptcy, I said, not looking up from the screen. You have too many assets technically, even if they are illiquid. And you cannot declare Chapter 13 because you have no viable repayment plan. Your credit is so destroyed that no one will even give you a car loan, let alone restructure $500,000 in debt. Your only options are a short sale, which you do not have time for, or a full cash bailout. The room fell silent, except for my mother's crying. I looked at Ethan. He was staring at me, his expression a mixture of hatred and dawning, selfish terror. He was not afraid of losing the family home. He was afraid of losing his free lodging and his primary source of funding. Fine, he said, crossing his arms. I will contribute. My mother's head snapped up, her eyes wide with pathetic hope. You will? Ethan. Yet, I will offer future equity. He looked at me defiantly. When the company hits, and it will hit, I will give you 5%. 5% equity for helping us bridge this gap. I almost laughed. It was the most ludicrous, most delusional thing I had ever heard. He was offering me imaginary shares in a fantasy company in exchange for a real immediate $500,000 problem. There is no company, Ethan, I said quietly. There is just a second mortgage on this house that you maxed out. Future equity is worth zero. His face turned purple. You do not know anything about my business. You are just a bean counter. You have no vision. I am the only one in this room who is looking at the beans, I said. And the beans are gone. I turned back to my parents. They were looking at me. Their savior. Their little adult. They were waiting. They were waiting for me to pull another 99-cent bag of oats off the bottom shelf so they could have their protein powder. I spent that night in my old childhood bedroom. The bed was too small. The posters from high school were still on the wall, faded and curling at the edges. I sat on the floor, my back against the wall, and I stared at my own financial life on my laptop screen. I had been so careful, so disciplined for 10 years. I had lived like a monk. I had saved every bonus. I had maxed out my 401k. I had a separate high-yield savings account that held my life's work. It was my down payment fund. It was enough to buy a small condo in Minneapolis. It was my escape hatch. It was my future. I could walk away. The thought was so sharp, so clear. It made me catch my breath. Legally, I had no obligation. My name was on none of this debt. I could pack my bag, drive back to Minneapolis, and let the consequences they had built for themselves finally land on their own heads. It was the correct, logical, analytical decision. But then I pictured it. I pictured the auction. I pictured a stranger in a cheap suit bidding on their lives. I pictured the moving van, the sheriff's deputy. I pictured my mother's garden, the one thing she actually cared for, being bulldozed by a developer. I pictured my father, a proud man broken by his own foolishness, packing his clothes into a cardboard box. I was not saving them. I knew even then that they were beyond saving. They were a recursive error in a line of code that would always lead back to zero. But I was saving the house, the physical structure, the place where I had learned to read, the staircase I had sat on, listening to them decide my future. I was saving the container that held all the evidence. I could not just give them the money. That would be like pouring gasoline on a house fire. They would just find a way to burn it all again. If I did this, I had to take control. At 3 o'clock in the morning, I called a friend from college, Sarah, who is now a vice president at a credit union in Des Moines. I woke her up. I did not care. I need a professional opinion, I said, and I laid out the entire situation in the cold, flat language of a risk report. Jesus, Aurora, she said, her voice thick with sleep. You are talking about a full buyout. You would have to pay off the primary mortgage. the second mortgage, and the tax liens all at once. Yes, I said. Can you even do that? I have the capital, I said. I have been saving for a down payment. I need to know the mechanism. If I pay it all off, can I have the title transferred to me? Can I become the sole mortgage holder? Yes, she said. You would essentially be buying the house from the bank just before they foreclose. You would be the new lien holder. The property would be yours, free and clear. And your parents will. They would essentially be your tenants. Tenants. The word felt right. It is the only way, she said. Her voice softer now. It is the only way. You are not just throwing that money into a bottomless pit. If you do this, you have to own the asset. It is the only leverage you have. I hung up the phone. The decision was made. I was not just fixing their problem. I was acquiring their debt. I was acquiring their asset. I was acquiring my leverage. The next 5 days were a blur of wire transfers, lawyer calls, and frantic paperwork. I pulled every dollar from my future. I emptied my down payment fund. I liquidated my stocks. I took a massive penalty-ridden withdrawal from my retirement account to cover the last $50,000. We all met at a title office in downtown Riverton. My parents looked dazed, like survivors of a car crash. They were signing stacks of paper they did not understand. All they knew was that the foreclosure was stopping. The crisis was handled. Ethan was there in the corner on his phone, already talking to a new potential investor. His brush with reality having lasted less than a week. When the final paper was signed, the lawyer, a tired looking man who had seen this all before, handed me a thick folder. Congratulations. Rodriguez, he said, looking only at me. You are now the sole owner of the property on Sycamore Street. My mother cried, this time with relief. She hugged me, pressing her damp face against my blouse. You saved us. Aurora. You saved us. My father just nodded, his face pale, unable to meet my eyes. Ethan glanced up from his phone as we walked out. What would we do without our little Aurora? He said with a smirk, not a hint of irony in his voice. As the dust settled over the next few weeks, the final tally was $450,000. I had poured my entire future, a decade of sacrifice into the foundation of a house I did not live in to protect 3 people who had never protected me. We had a verbal agreement, a simple one. They would reimburse me over time. They would treat it like a loan. We all knew it was a lie. But it was the lie that let them sleep at night. The lie that allowed my father to maintain the illusion of his own authority. On the long, quiet drive back to Minneapolis, I did not feel like a hero. I did not feel relief. I felt hollowed out. I felt like I had just surgically removed a part of myself, a vital organ, and transplanted it into a dying body. I had saved their house, but I had also just bought my chains. And as I crossed the state line back into Minnesota, the only thing I knew for sure was that I had just signed away my own life. No one had asked me what it cost. They did not have to. They just assumed, as they always had, that I could afford it. I did not move for a long time after the call disconnected. The phone was still in my hand, the plastic warm against my palm. The office was completely silent, but my ears were ringing with the echo of their voices. The city continued its silent snowy descent outside the glass wall, indifferent to the fact that my world had just shifted on its axis. I replayed the conversation word by word with the same forensic precision I applied to my work. I was not looking for emotion. I was looking for the flaw in the logic, the pivot point. Your brother's in charge. He's hosting. Don't make it complicated. We need to respect his leadership. We need peace. For my entire life, I had been the peacekeeper. I was the one who smoothed things over, the one who absorbed the financial shocks, the one who balanced the emotional checkbook. Now, suddenly, I was the complication. I was the source of conflict. I was the threat to the peace. Why? Because I had saved them. Emo? That was not it. I was the conflict because I existed. I was the conflict because my success was a quiet, constant rebuke to Ethan's failures. I was the complication because I was the one who saw the numbers and they could not have the person who knew the truth at the table while they were trying to build a fantasy. The family peace they wanted was just the silent shared agreement to live inside Ethan's delusion. My presence, my very existence was a threat to that delusion. I thought about Christmases past. I tried to recall a single one where I had just sat, relaxed, and enjoyed myself. The memories that came back were a blur of functions. I remember being 16, using my library paycheck to buy thoughtful, specific gifts for everyone, only to watch Ethan hand out gift cards he had made my mother buy him that morning, receiving praise for being so efficient. I remember being 22, home from college, spending all of Christmas Eve cooking the Noche Buena feast because my mother found the process too stressful. I remember being 28, sitting on the floor by the tree, mediating a screaming match between Ethan and my father because Ethan felt disrespected by the brand of watch my father had bought him. My role at Christmas was to wrap, to cook, to clean, to douse the emotional fires Ethan set, and to manage my parents' anxiety about his latest crisis. And what was my reward? The same compliment every year, usually delivered by my mother as I was clearing the last of the dishes. My back aching. You're just so low maintenance, Aurora. It's such a blessing. We never have to worry about you. Low maintenance. A blessing. They did not see that low maintenance was a full-time job. It was the exhausting, invisible labor of managing all my own needs, all my own feelings, all my own problems, so that I would not add a single ounce of weight to the scale that was already permanently tipped in Ethan's favor. I was not low maintenance. I was self-maintaining, and they had mistaken that for having no needs at all. I stood up from my desk. The numbness in my body was beginning to recede, replaced by a cold, sharp energy. I packed my laptop into my bag, put on my coat, and walked out of the silent office. The drive from downtown to my studio apartment in the North Loop was slow. The snow was coming down hard now, thick and heavy, and the roads were treacherous. I kept both hands on the wheel, my focus absolute. I did not turn on the radio. I just drove through the muffled white world, the question repeating in my head like a mantra. They could so easily, without a second thought, discard the person who saved the house in order to plate the person who almost lost it. What exactly was I fighting to hold on to? The loyalty I had shown was to an idea of family, to a fantasy of what I wished we were. But the reality was a parasitic ecosystem, and I was the host. They were not just uninviting me from a holiday. They were, in the clearest terms possible, telling me that my $450,000 contribution was less valuable than Ethan's comfort. My sacrifice was disposable. I was disposable. I parked in my building's underground garage and went up to my tiny apartment. I did not turn on the lights. I dropped my keys in the ceramic bowl by the door, a bowl I had bought at a local art fair. One of the few non-functional beautiful things I owned. I took off my coat and sat on my sofa in the near-total darkness, looking out the cracked window at the brick wall of the building next door. This was the moment. This was the moment the guilt was supposed to arrive. I waited for it. I waited for the familiar hot wave of shame. I waited for the self-rumination, the voice that would whisper I had been too cold, too analytical, that I should have been softer, that I should have just managed the situation better. I waited for the desperate, clawing loneliness that would make me pick up the phone, call them back, and beg. I sat there in the dark and waited. But the guilt did not come. The silence in the room stretched on, and it remained empty. There was no shame. There was no panic. There was no desperate need to be forgiven for a crime I had not committed. Instead, I felt something else. It was a feeling so foreign I almost did not recognize it. It was clean. It was cold. It was absolute. It was clarity. I realized sitting there that my parents had just given me the first truly valuable gift of my entire life. They had given me my freedom. They had with their own words severed the chain. The guilt I had carried was not my own. It was a synthetic burden they had trained me to carry, and the spell had just broken. I had never had a Christmas, not a real one. I had only ever participated in the Rodriguez family's annual performance of stability. My Christmas had never been about joy or rest or connection. It had been about crisis management, emotional labor, and damage control. The thought of spending December 25th alone in my studio apartment eating takeout and watching movies no longer felt like a punishment. Felt like a vacation. And then another thought. What if I was not alone? I thought about the people in my orbit here in Minneapolis. The people who were not connected to the black hole in Riverton. My mind went first to Mr. Dalton, my elderly widowed neighbor in apartment 3B. A kind and quiet man who had lived in the building for 30 years. I knew from the building manager that his children lived in California and rarely visited. I knew he spent most holidays heating up a single serving of soup because he had told me so himself in the elevator last Thanksgiving. My mind went to Jasmine, a junior analyst on my team at Harbor Line. Brilliant. Funny single mother to a 6-year-old boy named Leo. I knew she was struggling. I saw the quiet stress in her eyes every time the end of the month approached. I knew she was from Texas and could not afford the plane tickets to fly home to her family. My mind went to the kids. The teenagers. I volunteered one Saturday a month for a nonprofit that taught financial literacy to at-risk youth. Most of them were from the foster system or group homes. They were kids who knew more about overdraft fees than any adult. Kids who were already carrying the world on their shoulders. Malik, Jonah, Kai, and Theo. Their faces flashed in my mind. Where were they supposed to be on Christmas Eve? Where would they go for a hot meal where no one asked them for anything in return? A new, rebellious, and deeply unfamiliar idea sparked in my chest. It felt warm. What if I spend Christmas with people who see me instead of people who spend me? What if I took all the energy I normally poured into managing my family's dysfunction and poured it into creating one single night of peace for people who actually deserved it? I stood up and turned on a lamp. The warm glow filled the small room. I went to my desk, sat down, and opened my laptop. I did not text my mother to beg. I did not text my father with a list of my sacrifices. I did not text Ethan to tell him he was a narcissistic parasite. I opened a group chat. It was the one I kept with my mints from the literacy program. My fingers flew across the keyboard. Hey everyone. This is a last-minute, completely optional thing. I am hosting a dinner at my apartment on Christmas Eve. If you do not have anywhere you actually want to be, or if you just want some good free food with no strings attached, my door is open. No questions asked. Just show up. Let me know if you can make it so I know how much food to get. I hit send. Then I opened a new message to Jasmine. Hey Jasmine. I know you and Leo are not going to Texas this year. I am cooking a big dinner on Christmas night. It will be pretty low-key. But there will be way too much food and probably a very bad Christmas movie. If you two do not have other plans, I would love for you to come. No pressure at all. Just an open invitation. I hit send again. I closed the laptop and leaned back in my chair. A text from Malik, one of the teens, came back almost immediately. For real? You cooking? I'm there. Then one from Sky. Yeah, please. Thank you. I felt a smile spread across my face. It was a real one. It was not the tight, pained smile I wore in Riverton. It was light. I looked at my tiny, dark apartment. It was not a place of exile. It was not a punishment. It was a blank canvas. For the first time in my life, the idea of not going home for the holidays did not feel like a rejection. It did not feel like being left out in the cold. Felt like an escape. Felt like a doorway. My parents had slammed their door in my face, not realizing they had just shoved me bodily through a new one, and I had no intention of ever going back. My studio apartment was not a loft. It was 400 square feet of reclaimed brick and old hardwood, a box with a view of another box, but on Christmas Eve, felt like a ballroom. I had pushed my sofa and desk against the walls to make space in the center. I had set up my small dining table, augmented by a folding card table I had borrowed from the building's laundry room. They were covered in mismatched second-hand tablecloths, one floral, one plaid that I had found at a thrift store, my desk chair, my sofa cushions, and two folding chairs I had bought for $10 at a hardware store created a patchwork of seating. It was not perfect. It was not coordinated. It was not what my mother, with her obsession with appearances, would have ever called Christmas ready. It was perfect. I had strung white fairy lights around the one big window, and they cast a soft, starry glow on the brick wall, turning my tiny space into a grotto. The air was thick and warm, smelling of slow-cooked pulled pork, garlic, and the apple cinnamon scent of the two cheap candles burning on the counter. At precisely 6 o'clock, there was a soft, hesitant knock. Not a knock of demand, but one of apology. I opened the door. Mr. Dalton stood in the hallway, his thin shoulders hunched inside an immaculate old-fashioned wool overcoat. He was holding a small white bakery box, its corners slightly crushed. "Ora," he said, his voice a growly whisper. "I'm afraid I've come. I hope this is still all right, Mr. Dalton." "I'm so glad you're here," I said, taking his coat. "Come in, please. It's warm." He stepped inside, his eyes widening a little at the lights. "My goodness. This is lovely." He thrust the box at me. "It's not much. Just some fudge from the shop downstairs. Got a bit." He winced. "It's a bit muddled. I'm afraid I'm not fancy." I opened the box. The squares of chocolate fudge were indeed a little jumbled from his grip. I smiled. "Mr. Dalton, this is the most important thing here. This is the centerpiece." I cleared a space in the middle of the table, right between the two mismatched cloths, and set the box down with the reverence of placing a crown. He watched me, his pale blue eyes looking suspiciously bright, and then he gave me a small, real smile. The next knock, 20 minutes later, was a combination of a firm adult rap and a frantic tiny drumming. I opened it to find Jasmine, her face flushed from the cold, and her son, Leo, who was half hidden behind her legs. "We're here," Jasmine announced a little too loudly, her voice brittle with social anxiety. "We brought Leo brought this Leo." A small 6-year-old boy with enormous brown eyes held up a badly wrapped gift. It was clearly a dinosaur, a lumpy T-Rex shape covered in cheap, tearing wrapping paper from a dollar store. He was holding it with both hands, as if it were an offering. He insisted on bringing a host gift, Jasmine whispered to me, her smile strained. "It's his favorite. He might ask for it back." "T-Rex," I said, kneeling. "That is the best host gift I have ever received." "Leo. Does he have a name?" "Stompy?" Leo mumbled, his face in his mother's coat. "Well, Stompy is welcome. You are all welcome." As I took their coats, Jasmine looked around, her eyes taking in the lights, the food laid out on the counter. "Aurora, this is..." She stopped. "Thank you for this. We couldn't make it to Texas this year. The flight prices." She shook her head, but the deep, bone-wee sadness in her eyes said more than her words. "I'm glad you're here," I said. And I meant it. I made mac and cheese from a box. It's in the green bowl. I'm told it's a 6-year-old's kryptonite. Leo's head popped up. The green bowl. The green bowl. I confirmed the teens arrived last in a clump as if for mutual protection. Malik. Kai. Jonah. And Theo. They shuffled into the small entryway. A mass of damp parkas, beanies, and nervous energy. They were all talking at once until I opened the door, and then a sudden, awkward silence fell over them. They stood there, framed in the doorway, looking past me into the warm apartment. Their eyes were a mix of excitement and deep, profound defensiveness. These were kids who had been taught over and over that a free meal always had a price. They were used to pity to charity events in church basement where they were ministered to. They were not used to just being welcome. You're late, I said, breaking the silence with a grin. Malik. You were in charge of the playlist. Hand over your phone. Malik. The self-appointed leader broke into a grin. Joe. You don't want my playlist. Ms. It's too fire. This old man. He gestured at Mr. Dalton, who was already deep in conversation with Leo about dinosaurs. He might not be able to handle it. He can handle it, I said, ushering them in. Coats in the corner. Shoes off. The food is on the counter. The only rule is you can't leave until the pulled pork is gone. Kai. Theo. You're on drinks. There's soda and juice in the fridge. The apartment, which had felt cozy, was now full. It was loud. It was chaotic. And for the first 30 minutes, the conversation was stilted, breaking into small, awkward groups. Mr. Dalton and Leo were an island. Jasmine hovered near the food, nervously refilling a plate she wasn't eating. The teens huddled by the speaker, arguing over the music, their shoulders hunched. I was bringing out another bowl of food when Leo, who had finally finished his mac and cheese, asked in a very loud, very serious voice, Mr. Dalton. Santa is self-employed. Does he have to file quarterly estimated taxes? The room went dead silent. Jasmine's face went crimson. Mr. Dalton put his fork down, his expression completely serious. That is an excellent question, Leo, he said, his growly voice cutting through the quiet. I believe he's registered as a non-profit corporation, a 501c3. His mission is charitable after all. But the logistics, the elves, I would assume they're union. The reindeer are a depreciating asset, unless you consider them a capital expense for transportation. The most skeptical of the teens let out an involuntary snort. Then Malik started to laugh. A loud barking sound. Then Jasmine, her face in her hands, started to giggle. Suddenly, the entire room was laughing. The ice didn't just break. It shattered. After that, the wall came down. Mr. Dalton, turned out, was a natural storyteller. He told them about owning a hardware store in South Minneapolis for 40 years before the big box stores. He talked about the 1970s when a blizzard shut down the city for 3 days, and he and his wife lived on canned peaches and brandy. Malik and Jonah got into a loud, passionate, and deeply technical argument about whether Die Hard was a Christmas movie. It has a Christmas party. It has Christmas music and it has a lesson about family. Malik shouted his mouth full of pork. It has machine guns. Miser. He's yelling about machine guns. Jonah countered. So Home Alone has a nail gun. It's the same thing. Jasmine, sitting on the sofa with a plate in her lap, looked over at me. Her shoulders were relaxed for the first time since I'd met her. I have to admit, she said, just to me, this is the first time I've sat at a full table in God. I don't know how long that I haven't been doing the math in my head. You know, how much the food cost, how much I'm going to owe, who's going to start a fight. She looked at Leo, who was now showing sky pictures of dinosaurs on his mom's phone. It's just nice. At some point, I pulled out my phone. The room was loud, warm, and glowing. Everyone was talking, arguing, and laughing. I held up the phone. Everybody say tax exempt. Tax exempt. They all shouted. And I snapped the picture. I looked down at the image on my screen. It was blurry, badly lit, and chaotic. And there, in the middle of it all, was my hand holding a plate. I realized I was in the photo, too. My arm, my shoulder, my own smiling face scrunched up in laughter. The realization hit me so hard I almost dropped the plate. In every Christmas photo from Riverton, I was on the edge of the frame. If I was in it at all, I was the one taking the picture. Or I was in the background, out of focus. My hands already full of trash. My face tight with the stress of making sure the perfect moment was achieved. In this photo, I was not on the edge. I was not the support staff. I was in the middle of the joy. My shoulders were down. My smile was real. I was not performing. I was just there. Later in the evening, Kai, the quietest of the teens, came up to me as I was gathering plates. She was a kid who had seen too much. Her eyes always wary. She whispered so low I could barely hear her. Yeah, Kai, are you okay? You need anything? No. I wanted to say this is the first family dinner I've had all year where nobody was drunk. She looked down at her feet and nobody yelled and nobody asked me for my money for my paycheck. She looked up and her eyes were clear. So yeah, this was really good. I put the plates down. I did not know what to say. I just put my hand on her shoulder and she leaned into the touch for just a second. The party wound down near 11. The teens gathered their coats, their awkwardness gone, replaced by a sleepy, well-fed comfort. This was dope. Malik said, giving me a quick sideways hug. Seriously. Next time I'm cooking, Mr. Dalton was the last of that group to leave. He took my hand in both of his skin dry as paper. Aurora, he said, you are a good woman. Thank you for including an old fool in this. Thank you for the fudge. Mr. Dalton. I said, see you soon. See you soon, he replied. Jasmine and Leo had stayed for the Christmas night invitation. After the teens left, the apartment felt huge and quiet. We put Leo to bed on my sofa, a fortress of pillows around him. Stompy the dinosaur clutched in his hand. Jasmine and I stood in my tiny kitchen, washing the mountain of dishes. The water was hot, the steam rising around us. For a few minutes, we just washed and dried in comfortable silence. He was so happy, Jasmine said, her voice soft. I haven't seen him that relaxed around strangers ever. He's usually so shy. He was the star of the show, I said, handing her a dripping plate. The tax question was brilliant. She laughed. A real warm sound. She stopped drying and put the towel down. She turned to me, her eyes serious. Aurora. Yeah. She reached out and put her hand on my arm right over my wet sleeve. You have no idea what this means, she said. And her voice was thick. I was so depressed this week, dreading tomorrow. Dreading him waking up and me not having anything, not having this. She gestured to the messy, warm apartment. You saved our Christmas, Aurora. I mean, you really truly saved it. I looked at her. I looked at her hand on my arm. The word saved echoed in the room. When my family used that word, it was a transaction. It was an invoice. You saved us. My mother had cried. And what she meant was, you have paid. You saved us, was the prelude to the next demand. It was a word that felt heavy, like a debt I was now owed, a debt I could never ever collect. But when Jasmine said it, the word was light. It was not an invoice. It was a receipt. It was a simple, true acknowledgement of a gift given and received. It did not pull anything from me. It gave me something. It was the first time in my life that saving someone felt like a victory, instead of just a postponement of another bigger loss. "I'm glad you were here," I said, my own voice thick. "I'm really glad." After she and a sleepy Leo had gone, I was alone again. It was after midnight. It was officially Christmas Day. My apartment was a disaster. There were plates and cups everywhere, stains on the tablecloths, and a faint lingering smell of sugar and pork. I started to clean. But this time it was different. I was not cleaning with the familiar bitter resentment, my back aching while others laughed in the next room. I was cleaning with a deep humming sense of peace. I picked up the blurry photo from the table. I looked at the laughing, chaotic, mismatched group of people I had gathered in my tiny home. I realized, as I wiped down the last counter, that my parents had not canceled my Christmas at all. They had not taken anything from me. They had, in their selfish, blind cruelty, accidentally given me the greatest gift of all. They had given me the opportunity to have the first Christmas that was truly entirely my own. The morning after Christmas, Minneapolis was buried under a fresh, pristine blanket of snow. The sun was blindingly bright, reflecting off the white drifts and filling my apartment with a sharp, clean light. I was still in my flannel pajamas, sitting on the sofa with my knees pulled up to my chest, holding a mug of coffee that was still too hot to drink. On my phone screen, I was swiping through the photos from the night before. There was Mr. Dalton laughing with his mouth open, a smear of chocolate fudge on his chin. There was Leo asleep on this very sofa, clutching his plastic dinosaur. There was the group selfie, blurry and chaotic, where for the first time in my life, I wasn't standing on the periphery holding a trash bag. I looked at my own face in the picture. I looked relaxed. I looked happy. I looked like someone I would want to know. I felt a strange, weightless sensation in my chest. It took me a moment to identify it. It was relief. The holiday was over, and I had not spent a single second managing my mother's anxiety, or my father's passive aggression, or Ethan's ego. I had not walked on eggshells. I had just lived. Then the silence shattered. It was not a knock. It was a pounding, a heavy rhythmic thudding against the wood of my front door that spoke of entitlement and fury. It was the sound of someone who did not believe they needed permission to enter. I froze. I knew that knock. I had heard it on my bedroom door 1,000 times growing up, usually right before I was scolded for something I hadn't done. I set my coffee down on the coaster. My hands were steady. I stood up, tightened the belt of my robe, and walked to the door. I did not check the peephole. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled it open. They were standing in the hallway like a storm front. Carol, Martin, and Ethan. Their cheeks were flushed a deep, angry red from the biting wind, but their eyes were burning with something much hotter. They did not say hello. They did not wish me a Merry Christmas. They simply surged forward, pushing past me into the apartment as if they owned the lease. My mother was the first to speak, and she did not waste time with pleasantries. She spun around in the middle of my entryway, her coat dripping melting snow onto the floor I had just cleaned. "How could you?" she hissed. Her voice was shaking, vibrating with a mixture of rage and self-pity. "How could you tell everyone we banned you from Christmas? Do you have any idea how humiliated we were? Do you have any idea what Aunt Denise said to me?" I closed the door quietly behind them. I leaned back against it, crossing my arms over my chest. I did not tell everyone. I said my voice was calm, almost bored. It was the voice I used for hostile audits. Aunt Denise called me yesterday morning to ask what time I was arriving. I told her I wasn't coming. "You told her we kicked you out." Martin shouted. He was standing by the kitchen counter, his heavy boots leaving wet, gray slush marks on the hardwood. You made us look like monsters. Roar. Like we abandoned our own daughter. I looked at him. I told her that Ethan felt it would be less complicated if I didn't come. I said. I told her that you guys needed to respect his leadership and that you wanted peace. Those were your words. Dad. I quoted you directly. That is semantics. Ethan snapped. He was pacing the length of the small living room, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his expensive parka, a parka I knew I had paid for 3 winters ago. You spun it. You made it sound like I'm some kind of fragile headcase who can't handle his sister. I watched him pace. Are you saying you aren't? Asked. His head snapped toward me, his eyes narrowing. See, there it is. That attitude. That is exactly why I didn't want you there. You are always judging me. And now? Thanks to you. I have Uncle Jerry calling me, asking if I'm having a breakdown. I have investors. Aurora. I have a reputation. If word gets out that my own family thinks I'm unstable, do you know what that does to my valuation? There were no investors. There was no valuation. But Ethan lived in a world where his delusions were the only currency that mattered. And he was furious that I had devalued them. Martin shook his head, looking at me with deep disappointment, as if I were the one who had failed the moral test. It was a misunderstanding. Aurora. Family matters are private. You don't air dirty laundry to the extended relatives. You made your mother cry all night. I looked at Carol. She was indeed wiping at her eyes, though they looked dry to me. I didn't air dirty laundry, I said. I answered a question. If the truth humiliates you, that isn't my fault. You are the ones who made the decision. You just wanted to make it in the dark, so you could pretend to be a happy family in the light. Carol made a noise of disgust and turned away, looking around the apartment for the first time. Her eyes landed on the folding chairs I hadn't put away yet, the mismatched tablecloth still on the table, the stack of plates in the drying rack. What is all this? She asked, her lip curling. A mess. Absolute mess. And what did you do? Sit here alone in the dark and feel sorry for yourself? Is this the aftermath of your little pity party? She picked up a paper napkin from the table one Leo had crumpled and dropped it back down as if it were contaminated. Actually, I said, keeping my voice level, I had a dinner party. Ethan stopped pacing and laughed. A harsh barking sound. A dinner party. You with who? Your spreadsheets. With friends. I said. Carol rolled her eyes. You don't have friends. Aurora. You have colleagues. And I'm sure they were all thrilled to hear your sob story about how mean your mommy and daddy are. She stepped closer to me, invading my personal space. Tell me the truth. Did you tell them about the money? I looked her in the eye. Which money? I asked. The $450,000 I paid to save your house, or the money I send you every month for the bills you forget, or the bail money for Ethan? Don't get smart with me. She snapped. Did you tell people about the house arrangement? Did you tell Denise that the deed is in your name? I told Denise the truth. I said that I paid off the Rs and the mortgage to stop the foreclosure because she asked why I wasn't at the house I paid for. Martin groaned, rubbing his temples. Got. Aurora. You have no discretion. None. Do you know how that makes me look? I am the provider of that house. I am the head of the household. People respect me in Riverton now. They think I'm living off my daughter. You are living off your daughter, I said. The silence that followed was thick and sudden. Martin turned purple. Ethan looked like he wanted to punch the wall. Carol gasped, clutching her chest. We raised you, she shouted. We sacrificed everything for you. And this is how you repay us. By counting pennies. by holding every little favor over our heads. It wasn't a favor. Mom, I said. It was $500,000. It's family. Ethan yelled. He was in my face now, pointing a finger at me. Family money is fluid. You help us. We help you. That's how it works. When have you ever helped me? I asked quietly. Name one time. Ethan. Name one time in 32 years you have ever written a check to me, or helped me move, or even bought me a coffee that wasn't with Mom's credit card. He sputtered, his face flushing. I provide the vision. I provide the potential when my company hits. I told you I'm going to take care of everyone, but you're too short-sighted to see it. You're trying to sabotage me before I can even launch. I walked past him to the kitchen and poured the rest of my coffee down the sink. I needed to do something with my hands because they were starting to tremble. Not with fear, but with the adrenaline of finally saying the things I had swallowed for decades. Why are you here? Asked, turning back to face them. You didn't drive 4 hours in the snow just to yell at me about Aunt Denise. You could have done that over the phone. They exchanged a look. It was a quick shifting glance. The conspiratorial look of a team that realizes the opening strategy has failed, and they need to switch to the backup plan. The anger in the room didn't vanish, but it changed texture. Became sharper. More desperate. Martin cleared his throat. He pulled out a chair. One of the folding chairs I had bought for the party, and sat down heavily. Well, he said, his voice dropping an octave into his reasonable father register. Since you asked, it has been a hell of a week, Aurora. A hell of a week. I waited. The storm, Carol said, her voice suddenly trembling again. It was brutal in Riverton. The wind it took off a section of the shingles. The roof is leaking into the master bedroom, into your old room and the furnace. Martin added. It kicked the bucket on Christmas Eve. We had to use space heaters. The house is freezing. Aura. We're walking around in parkas. I leaned against the counter. So. Call a repairman, I said. We did. Martin said. They quoted us $12,000 for the roof and another $8,000 for the furnace. I stared at them. And we don't have $20,000 sitting around, Ethan shouted, throwing his hands up. Obviously. So. You came here to get it, I said. Carol stepped forward, her face softening into that familiar, manipulative mask of pleading. We didn't come just for that. We came because we're a family, and families solve problems together. We can't live in a freezing house. Aurora, it's dangerous. Your father's blood pressure. And there is another thing, Ethan interrupted, stepping in front of her. The funding round? I looked at him. What funding round? The Series A, he said. As if I should know. The investors got cold feet. Probably because of the rumors you started about my stability. They pulled the term sheet this morning. I almost laughed. There never was a term sheet. So I asked. So, I need a runway, he said. He was speaking fast now, his hands moving in the air, sketching out invisible charts. I need about 6 months of operating capital to pivot. I found a new developer who can fix the back end, but he wants cash up front. How much? I asked. I wanted to hear the number. I wanted to hear the audacity of it out loud. 50,000, he said, plus the repairs for the house. So, call it $75,000 total. $75,000. He said it like he was asking for $5 for a sandwich. Ethan smiled. Then it was a tight winning smile. The one he used to charm grandmothers at church. Look, Aurora. You cover this. You write the check for the repairs and the runway. We fix the house. I get the company back on track. And if you do that, we will forgive you. I blinked. You will forgive me? Yet, he said magnanimously. We'll move past this whole Christmas drama. We'll tell the relatives it was all a big misunderstanding. We'll restore your reputation in the family. We'll wipe the slate clean." He looked at me expectantly. My parents looked at me expectantly. They stood there in my tiny kitchen, surrounded by the remnants of a joy they hadn't been part of. And they waited for me to do what I had always done. They waited for the machine to work. They waited for the ATM to dispense the cash. Ethan leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Come on, sis. You're good with money. You have that fancy job. This is nothing to you. But it's everything to us. This is nothing to you." The phrase hung in the air to them. My labor was nothing. My sacrifice was nothing. My life was nothing but a reservoir for them to drain. They looked at me and saw a resource, limitless and feelingless. I looked at my father, shivering slightly in his coat, waiting for me to save him from his own lack of planning. I looked at my mother, clutching her purse, waiting for me to save her from discomfort. I looked at Ethan, arrogant and delusional, waiting for me to save him from reality. It felt like I was watching a rerun of a show I used to love but had now outgrown. I knew all the lines. I knew exactly what would happen if I said yes. I would write the check. The roof would get patched, not fixed. The furnace would be replaced with the most expensive model. Ethan would blow the $50,000 on a branding consultant and a new lease for a car he didn't need. And in 6 months or 3 months or 1 month, they would be back at my door with a new crisis, a new demand, and the same absolute lack of gratitude. But the difference this time was that I wasn't on the stage with them. I was in the audience. And I was bored. I looked down at the coffee cup I had just emptied. I placed it in the sink with a soft clink. I looked up at them. The silence stretched out. They started to shift uncomfortably. They were used to me arguing or crying or sighing and pulling out my checkbook. They were not used to me looking at them with this cold anthropological curiosity. So Ethan asked, his smile faltering slightly, "Do we have a deal?" I took a slow breath. The air in the apartment smelled of stale coffee and the faint lingering scent of Mr. Dalton's fudge. "No," I said. They froze. "What?" Carol asked. I said, "No, irrapata. I am not writing a check. Not for the roof. Not for the furnace. And certainly not for your imaginary company." "Ethan." Martin stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Ora. Be reasonable. The house is freezing. You legally own it. You have a responsibility." "I do own it," I interrupted. "And as the owner, I am telling you that I am not putting another dime into it while you are living there rent-free, destroying the asset. You can't be serious." Ethan scoffed. "You have the money. We know you have it." "I do," I said. "But it's not for you." Carol's face twisted. "You are being cruel. You are being vindictive just because we didn't want you at Christmas. This is petty revenge. It's not revenge." "Mom," I said. "It's finance. You are a bad investment. I have poured $500,000 into that house, and the only return I have received is being told I am not welcome in it." I walked over to the coffee table. The folder was there. The blue folder I had prepared months ago, sitting under a stack of magazines. I had almost forgotten it was there. I pulled it out. I slid it across the table toward them. It hit the wood with a heavy slap. "What is this?" Martin asked, looking at it like it was a bomb. "That," I said, "is the ledger. It is every dollar I have sent you since I was 18. It is the mortgage payoff. It is the tax liens. It is the document you signed agreeing to reimburse me." "I don't want to look at your stupid spreadsheets," Ethan shouted. "I want a check." "You aren't getting a check." "Ethan," I said, my voice hardening into steel, "you are getting a reality check." I pointed to the door. "I suggest you leave. I have a lot of cleaning to do. I had a party last night. And unlike you, My guests actually respect me. They stood there for a moment, stunned into silence by the absolute finality of my tone. They looked at the folder. They looked at me. And for the first time, I saw a flicker of genuine fear in their eyes. They weren't afraid of the cold house. They were afraid because the machine had stopped. The button they had pushed for 30 years was no longer connected to anything. "You will regret this," Carol whispered. "You will lose your family." I looked at the three strangers standing in my living room. "I think I said, I already lost you a long time ago. I'm just finally stopping the payments. Get out." I didn't shout it. I didn't scream. I said it with the same calm authority I used to close a meeting and slowly, confused and terrifyingly silent. They turned around and walked out the door. I let the silence in the apartment stretch. I let it grow until it was heavy and suffocating, until the only sound was the drip of melting snow from my father's coat. They all stared at me, their faces a mixture of greedy anticipation and impatience. Ethan's sales pitch smile was still frozen on his face, waiting for my capitulation for the machine to dispense the cash. No. The word was not loud. It was not angry. It was flat. It was a single, perfect, polished stone dropped into a frozen lake. It cracked everything. Carol's mouth fell open. Martin's body went rigid as if I had struck him. Ethan actually laughed. A short disbelieving snort. "That's funny." "Aurora," he said, his smile wavering. "For a second there, I thought you said no." I looked him in the eye. "I did. No. I am not paying for the roof. I am not paying for the furnace. And I am absolutely not funding your imaginary company, Ethan. I am not patching anything else. Not ever again." The explosion was immediate. It was as if the word no was the trigger for a detonator they had all been wearing. "Cruel." My mother shrieked, her voice leaping octaves. "You are a cruel old-hearted girl after everything we have done for you, after the way we raised you. You owe us." My father shouted, his face turning a mottled shade of red. His provider mask was gone, replaced by the face of a man whose authority had been challenged. "I am your father. You owe us respect. You owe us loyalty. We are your family." "Selfish." Ethan spat, jabbing a finger at me. "You are the most selfish person I have ever met. You are sitting here in your fancy city apartment with all your money, watching us freeze. You have a black heart. Aurora. You would rather see us homeless than give up 1% of your dragon hoard." They swirled around me in the small room. A three-person storm of guilt, obligation, and accusation, their voices overlapping, each one a familiar jab, a well-worn knife. I had heard it all before. "You owe us. We raised you. You're selfish. You're cold." I did not raise my voice. I did not argue. I just stood there, letting the storm break over me. And when they finally paused for breath, exhausted by their own performance, I simply turned, walked to the small desk in the corner of the room, and opened the bottom drawer. I pulled out a single navy blue folder. It was thick. It was heavy. It was the work I had been doing in the dark, the report I had been compiling for months, long before the Christmas call. I had been an analyst for them for 20 years. It was only right that I finally presented my findings. I walked back to the coffee table, which was still littered with the crumbs of last night's joy, and I placed the folder down. I did not slide it. I set it down with intention. "You are right," I said, my voice cutting cleanly through the heavy panting air. "You're right, Dad. I do owe you. I owe you an accounting. So, let's look at the numbers. Let's do the audit." I opened the folder. The first page was on top. It was a spreadsheet. "This," I said, pointing to the first column, "is every financial transfer I have made to you, Mom or Dad, since I started my first job in Des Moines. Let's review the highlights. Their faces were blank. They were confused. This was not part of the script. Here, I said. Tapping a line. June 2014. $3,200. That was to cover Ethan's DUI and impound fees, which he never told you about. Here. May 2016. $5,000. That was to cover your credit card. Dad. After your bad run with your poker buddies, Martin flinched. His eyes wide. Carol shot him a look of pure venom. I have categorized them. Continued. My voice calm. Like I was presenting to a boardroom. Emergency bailouts. Utility bills. Car payments. Ethan's seed money. Of which I have counted 7 separate instances. The total before we even get to the house is $112,456.38. I flipped the page. This is Exhibit B. The $450,000. Here is the confirmation of the wire transfer that paid off the primary mortgage. Here is the check that paid off the predatory second loan Ethan took out. Here is the payment to the county for the 2 years of back taxes you forgot about the total cost to save the asset. I looked at them. They were silent. They looked pale. But this? I said, pulling out the last thickest document from the folder. This is the most important part. This is the part you should have read before you signed. I spread the document on the coffee table. It was the refinance agreement. It was the new deed. You see? When I paid that $450,000, I didn't give it to you. I bought the debt. I bought the asset. This document, which you both signed in the presence of a notary on September 28th of last year, transferred legal ownership of the property on Sycamore Street to me, Roy Rodriguez, as collateral for the loan. A loan which, according to this reimbursement plan which you also signed, you defaulted on your first payment. I looked up at them. Their faces were ashen. So to be perfectly legally clear, I said, my voice kind like I was explaining a difficult concept to a child. You are not living off your daughter. You are on paper tenants in my house. You are tenants who have not paid rent. The bank does not recognize Martin as the head of the household. The bank recognizes me as the sole owner. And I am telling you, as the owner, I am not fixing the roof of a property that is currently occupied by non-paying tenants who are actively damaging the asset. My mother was the first to find her voice. It was a ray. Hateful whisper. You're cold, she breathed. This is cold. This is calculating. To keep spreadsheets to hold this against us. You turned our family. You turned love into paperwork. No. Mom, I said, shaking my head. You did. You turned me into an ATM long before I printed out the receipts. You taught me to be this way. You taught me that love was a transaction. You taught me that my value was based on what I could pay. I'm just finally closing the account. You're holding the house hostage. Ethan suddenly roared, finding his anger again. It was the only emotion he had. You're using it to blackmail us. No. Ethan, I said. My patience finally gone. I am not holding it hostage. The bank was holding it hostage. I am the one who saved it from the bank. I am the one who pulled it from the fire you set. And you are angry at me because I won't let you burn it down again. I stood up. I slowly, deliberately put every single piece of paper back into the navy blue folder. I closed the cover. It felt final. Felt like closing a casket. I placed the folder on the coffee table. But this time, I did not give it to them. It was mine. This, I said, tapping the folder, is everything I will ever give you. This is the last check. There will be no more money. There will be no more crisis management. There will be no more covering for Ethan. There will be no more secrets about who saved what or who paid for what. The ledger is closed. I walked to the front door. I opened it. The cold, bright hallway air rushed in. A clean shock against the hot, stagnant anger in the room. You need to leave now, I said. This conversation is over. They just stood there stunned. What happens now? My father asked, his voice small. The voice of a man who had just realized he'd lost a war he didn't even know he was fighting. You'll get a letter, I said. A formal one from my lawyer. It will outline your options. You'll want to read this one. Do not just throw it in the pile. I pointed out into the hall. Leave, Carol looked at me, her face a crumpled mask of hatred. You will be so alone, she whispered. I thought of Mr. Dalton's smile. I thought of Leo asleep on my sofa. I thought of Jasmine's hand on my arm. The lightness of the word saved. No. Mom, I said. I won't. I'm just getting started. They walked out. My father. Defeated. My mother radiating pure uncut rage. Ethan vibrating. Looking at me like he wanted to kill me. I closed the door on them. I locked the deadbolt. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood, and for the first time since I was 8 years old, I felt the books finally truly balance. I did not hear the crash. I was not there to see the implosion, but the shockwave reached me even 300 m away. On New Year's Eve. I was not in Minneapolis. I had rented a small rustic cabin on the north shore of Lake Superior, a 3-hour drive from the city. The cabin was all pine wood and wool blankets with a massive stone fireplace that smelled of decades of wood smoke. The wind howled outside. A wild, clean sound. And the lake. A vast, dark, unmoving expanse of iron-gray water, stretched out to the horizon. I was not alone. I had brought my found family with me. Mr. Dalton sat in the largest armchair by the fire, a plaid blanket over his knees, reading a thick history book, looking more at peace than I had ever seen him. Jasmine and I were in the kitchen making hot chocolate from scratch, the real kind with melted chocolate and milk, while Leo sat on the counter, supervising. Sky and Theo, 2 of the oldest from the mentorship program, were in a fierce, silent battle of chess at the wooden dining table. We played board games. We ate chili I had made in a slow cooker. At 11:59, we all crowded around a tiny fuzzy television set and watched the countdown, our voices mixing as we shouted from 10 down to 1 when the ball dropped. We cheered. We banged pots and pans on the small wooden porch and we drank sparkling apple cider. It was quiet. It was simple. And it was the happiest New Year's of my life. I knew as I went to sleep that night on a lumpy sofa that 300 m south, a very different party was taking place. Before I left Minneapolis, I had performed one last analytical task. I had taken the core data from my navy blue folder and I had written a letter. It was not an emotional letter. It was not an accusation. It was a single page. A simple factual summary. It said, Dear Aunt Denise, Uncle Jerry, etc. As I will not be attending Christmas this year, I wanted to clear up any potential confusion about my absence or the family's financial situation. This fall, I intervened to stop the foreclosure on my parents' home by paying off $450,000 in combined mortgage debt, tax liens, and a predatory second loan. When I spoke to my parents, they informed me that Ethan was in charge of the holiday, and that he requested I not be there as my presence would make him uncomfortable. They asked me to sit this one out to keep the peace. I am respecting their wishes. I hope you have a wonderful holiday. I attached a single document to each letter. A copy of the public record showing the transfer of deed with my name listed as the owner. I did not include the spreadsheet of smaller debts. I did not include the angry details. I just provided the 2 facts that mattered. I paid. I was banned. I mailed 6 of these letters to the 6 relatives who were the biggest gossips, the ones who formed the central nervous system of the extended family social life. Then I turned off my phone, got in my car, and drove north. What I'm about to tell you is what I pieced together afterward from two primary sources. A very long, very detailed, and very satisfied phone call from Aunt Denise and a brief, tearful, and terrified text message from one of my cousins who had been there in Riverton. My parents, Carol and Martin, were attempting a full-scale narrative restoration. After the humiliation of Christmas Day, where I was told Aunt Denise's phone call about my absence had sent my mother into a private rage, they decided to double down. They threw their annual New Year's Eve party, a tradition meant to signify their stability and generosity. They hoped to reclaim the story, to show everyone that the rumors were false, that the Rodriguez house was strong, stable, and firmly under their control. The house, however, refused to cooperate. The house, which I now legally owned, the house that was freezing and rotting from the inside, had decided to stop keeping their secrets. The party began at 8 o'clock. My parents had spent a small fortune, likely on a credit card I would one day be expected to pay on catered food and top-shelf liquor. They were trying to project wealth and normally, but the guests arrived and kept their coats on. The first problem was the furnace. The $8,000 repair that I had refused to fund was not a joke. The furnace was, in fact, dead. My father had set up 3 small, inadequate space heaters, which hummed loudly in the corners of the living room, drawing so much power that the lights flickered every time the refrigerator compressor kicked on. The house was, according to my cousin, absolutely freezing. The second problem was the roof. The $12,000 patch I had vetoed was also not an exaggeration. The winter storm had done its work. As the party filled up, snow on the roof began to melt from the heat of the space heaters and the bodies, and the leak began. It was a slow, rhythmic drip drip drip, right over the beautifully arranged buffet table. First, my mother tried to ignore it. Then, as a drop landed in a bowl of shrimp cocktail, she tried to solve it. She placed a large glass salad bowl on the table to catch the water. So, for the rest of the night, the centerpiece of their party was not a festive floral arrangement, but a large glass bowl, slowly, audibly, filling with gray water. Drip, drip, drip. The guests, wrapped in their scarves and coats, huddled near the space heaters, trying to make polite conversation over the joint symphony of the groaning heaters, the flickering lights and the Chinese water torture of the leak. My father, I was told, tried to laugh it off. Old houses, you know, he boomed, his voice cracking with false cheer. They have so much character. My mother was not laughing. She was vibrating with a silent, murderous rage. Her smile plastered on so tight it looked like a dental grimace as she watched the water level in the salad bowl rise. The whispers started immediately. People weren't just whispering about the cold. They were whispering about why it was cold. They were whispering about the water stain that was visibly spreading across the ceiling, a map of their financial ruin. They were whispering about the strange, tense phone calls they'd received on Christmas Day. They were whispering about Aurora. Why wasn't she here at about 11 o'clock? With the party's morale at rock bottom, Aunt Denise decided she had waited long enough. Aunt Denise is not a subtle woman. She is the matriarch of my mother's side of the family, a woman who wields gossip like a broadsword. She had received my letter. She had seen the deed. She had spent the last week doing her own due diligence, and now she was ready to hold court. She waited for a lull in the conversation. Right after the furnace let out a particularly loud groan. She was standing in the middle of the living room, a glass of wine in her hand. She raised her voice. "Carol Martin." The room went quiet. "I have a question for you," she said, her voice carrying across the cold room. "I've been hearing some very interesting stories this week, and I received a very clinical letter." My mother froze. "Denise?" she said, her voice dangerously sweet. This is not the time or the place. It's a party. Oh, I think it's exactly the time and place, Aunt Denise said, taking a step forward. She held up her purse from which the edge of my letter was visibly peeking. Is it true? Martin. Is it true that Aurora paid nearly $500,000 to keep this house from being auctioned by the bank? The drip from the salad bowl was the only sound in the room. My father looked like he'd been shot. He stammered. Now, Denise, that's a wild exaggeration, is it? Aunt Denise pressed. Because I've been hearing 450,000. That's a very specific number for an exaggeration. It's a misunderstanding. My mother cut in her voice high and shrill. It's a private family matter that has been blown all out of proportion by a very dramatic girl. Dramatic? My Uncle Jerry, a quiet man who usually just smokes cigars in the garage, spoke up from the corner. He was holding his own copy of the letter. Doesn't seem dramatic to me. Seems like numbers. And this? He held up the second page. The copy of the deed. This says Aurora Rodriguez, sole owner. How come you never mentioned that, Martin? How come you're telling everyone at the Elks Lodge about your boy's big company, but you never mentioned that your daughter owns your house? The word owner hit the room like a physical blow. Loan. Date. Foreclosure. These were not words to be used in polite company in Rivorton. These were words of shame. Ethan, who had been sulking in the corner with his fiancée, a woman from a wealthy DMO family, finally exploded. This is unbelievable, he shouted, stepping forward. She's not here. And she still finds a way to make everything about her. She's twisted things. She's dramatic. She's trying to sabotage me. How is she sabotaging you, Ethan? Aunt Denise asked, her eyes landing on him like a hawk on a mouse. By paying for the roof over your head. Because this letter. It also says you were the one who didn't want her here. Says you banned your sister. The one who just paid off your parents' $500,000 debt from Christmas. Is that true? Ethan and my mother started talking at the same time. She's unstable. It's not what you think. She's a liar. Enough. My mother finally screamed, the word ripping through the room. The mask was gone. Her face was bare. Ugly. And furious. Just enough. Yes. All right. Yes. We told her not to come. We told her to stay away. Aunt Denise just stared at her. Why, Carol? Why would you do that? And then my mother. Cornered. Desperate. And out of lies. Made her fatal error. She told the truth. To keep things simple for Ethan, she shrieked, gesturing wildly at her golden boy. He was under so much stress. He's building a company. He didn't need her judgment all over the holiday. We had to keep the peace. We had to protect our son. The confession, raw and unvarnished, hung in the freezing air. We had to protect our son. No one spoke. The drip 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 of the leaking roof sounded as loud as a drum beat. My cousin said she watched Ethan's fiancée. The woman's face had gone perfectly, completely blank. She looked at Ethan, then at my parents, then at the water stain on the ceiling. She looked at the salad bowl. She looked at the crowd of relatives who were all staring at her future family with a mixture of pity and disgust. My great-uncle, a quiet farmer who had not said a word all night, walked over to the buffet, picked up a cracker, and then shook his head. He looked at my father. Martin, he said, his voice low and rumbling. If I had a child who saved my home, and I turned them away in the cold to protect the child who set the fire, I don't think I'd be able to look at myself in the mirror. He put the cracker down, walked to the front door, and left. That was it. The dam broke. It was not a stampede, but a quiet, Sudden exodus. People started murmuring excuses. It's late. The snow looks bad. I have to check on the kids. Within 10 minutes. The house was half empty. The party had completely and utterly imploded. My cousin's last text to me, sent at 11:45 a.m., was the one that I knew meant the war was over. It read, FYI. Ethan's fiancée just walked out. Didn't say goodbye. Just got in her car and drove away alone. I read that text in the warm, quiet cabin. Surrounded by the sound of sleeping people who felt safe with me, I turned off my phone, looked out the window at the black, icy expanse of Lake Superior, and I felt nothing but a profound and very deep peace. The image had cracked. The house was cold. And the truth was finally out. It was the 4th of January when the final chapter of my life as the Rodriguez family safety net began. The setting was not my chaotic, warm apartment, nor was it the freezing, leaking house in Riverton. It was a conference room on the 12th floor of a bank in downtown Minneapolis. The room was silent, smelled of carpet cleaner and old paper, and it was the most peaceful place on earth. I sat across from Mr. Henderson, a senior portfolio manager who had helped me structure the original buyout of the house. He was a man of few words and precise numbers, the kind of person who saw the world exactly the way I did. We were reviewing the options for the property on Sycamore Street. Legally, I held all the cards. I held the deed. I held the mortgage. I held the power to evict. But eviction was messy. And despite everything, I did not want to see the sheriff dragging my mother's antique vanity onto the curb in the snow. I wanted something cleaner. I wanted a dissolution of the partnership. A week prior, right after the disaster of their New Year's Eve party, I had sent a certified letter to my parents. It was not a personal letter. It was a legal notice drafted by my attorney. It outlined 2 choices. Option A was that they sign a formal lease agreement paying a monthly rent that covered the mortgage interest, property taxes, and a small maintenance fund with a strict 12-month term. At the end of the 12 months, they would either secure their own financing to buy the house back from me at market value, or they would vacate the premises so I could sell it. Option B was that they vacate immediately, and I would list the house for sale as is. I knew through the family grapevine that the letter had arrived on a Tuesday. I also knew that they had ignored it for a full 7 days. They were operating on the old data. They believed, as they always had, that Aurora was bluffing. They believed that my anger was a temporary weather pattern that would blow over, leaving the landscape unchanged. Ethan had reportedly told them not to worry, assuring them that I would never actually go through with it because I loved the family too much to humiliate them further. He was wrong. I did not love the family too much. I loved myself enough to stop. When they finally called me 3 days after the deadline I had set in the letter, they sounded breezy. They wanted to talk things over. They wanted to come up with a plan that works for everyone. They assumed we were entering a negotiation. I told them calmly that the negotiation period had ended when they ignored the certified letter. I told them that the paperwork had already been filed. I told them that if they wanted to sign the lease, they had to come to Minneapolis to the bank and sign it in front of a notary today. If they did not show up, I would proceed with option B. They showed up. They walked into the conference room looking smaller than I remembered. The anger that had fueled their invasion of my apartment the day after Christmas had burned out, replaced by a nervous, jittery desperation. The reality of the leaks, the broken furnace, and the public humiliation at the New Year's party had finally breached their defenses. Martin wore a suit that was slightly too big for him, a relic from his days as a successful salesman. Carol was wearing her best coat, but she looked tired, her eyes darting around the sterile room. Ethan was with them, slouching in a leather chair, looking sullen and bored, as if he were doing us a favor by being there. Mr. Henderson placed the documents on the mahogany table. The sound of the paper sliding across the wood was the only noise in the room. We are here, Martin said, clearing his throat. We are here to sort this out. We appreciate you meeting with us. Aurora. I did not smile. I did not offer them coffee. I sat with my hands folded on the table perfectly still. The terms have not changed. I said. The lease is for 1 year. The rent is set at $2,100 a month. That covers the carrying costs of the property. It is roughly 40% below market rate for a house of that size. It is a gift. A gift, Ethan scoffed, rolling his eyes. You call charging your parents' rent a gift? It is a gift because I could evict you for non-payment of the reimbursement agreement you already violated. I said. Not looking at him. I looked only at my father. You have 1 year. Dad, 12 months to fix your credit. Find a lender. And buy the house back from me. Or 12 months to find an apartment you can actually afford. Carol reached across the table. She did not try to grab my hand this time. She just rested her fingers near mine. A ghost of a gesture. Aurora, she said, her voice trembling. Please think about what you are doing. This is our home. It is where you grew up. It is full of memories. How can you treat it like a business transaction? I looked at her manicured nails. I thought about the memories. I thought about the kitchen table where I learned to balance a checkbook at 8 years old. I thought about the living room where I was told I had to be the strong one. I thought about the hallway where I stood listening to them decide to fund Ethan's dreams with my sacrifices. I am treating it like a business transaction because that is what you made it. I said softly. You stopped treating it like a home when you used it as an ATM to fund Ethan's delusions. You stopped treating it like a home when you mortgaged it to the hilt and then ignored the bills. But we are family. She whispered. I listed the dates. On November 4th, 2012, I paid your electric bill. I said. You told me I was family. On March 10th, 2015, I paid for the transmission on the van. You told me I was family. On September 28th of last year, I paid $450,000 to save the roof over your heads. And 3 months later, you told me not to come to Christmas because my presence was inconvenient. I looked up and met her eyes. You only play the family card when the bill comes due. Mom, when it is time to receive, you are family. When it is time to give, you are strangers. Ethan slammed his hand on the table. This is extortion. He shouted. His face was red, the veins in his neck bulging. You are holding a gun to their heads. You are forcing them to sign this garbage contract just to humiliate me. I turned to him for the first time in my life. I looked at my brother and saw him exactly as he was. He was not a visionary. He was not a genius. He was a 34-year-old man who had never been told no. This contract has nothing to do with you, Ethan. I said. You are not a party to this lease. Your name is not on the deed. Your name is not on the mortgage. You are a guest in their home, and if they sign this, you are a guest in my property. I am cutting you off. Continued. There is a clause in the lease. Subletting is not permitted without owner approval, but I am making an exception for you. You can stay there. But I will never ever give you another cent. If the company fails, it fails. If you need bail, call a bondsman. If you need gas money, walk. He stared at me, his mouth open. Are you cutting me off? You can't do that. We are siblings. I already did. I said. You cut me off first. You cut me out of the family gathering. You decided I wasn't necessary. I am just formalizing the arrangement. He stood up. I am not listening to this. I am not going to sit here and let my little sister dictate my life. I am done with you. Aurora. You are dead to me. I looked at him calmly. You already made that clear. Ethan. You only call when you need something. If you don't need anything, then we have nothing to talk about. He looked at our parents, waiting for them to defend him, waiting for them to scold me. But they were looking at the lease agreement. They were looking at the numbers. They were looking at the reality of a cold Minnesota winter and a homeless shelter. They did not look up. Fine. Ethan yelled. Fine. Be that way. See how far you get without us. He stormed out of the conference room. The heavy door clicked shut behind him. The silence rushed back in, heavier than before. Carol wiped a tear from her cheek. She looked old. For the first time, I saw the lines around her mouth, the gray at her temples. We are your family, Aurora, she said again. But the fire was gone. It was just a rote recitation of an old prayer. You owe us loyalty. I took a breath. It was the breath I'd been holding for decades. Loyalty is not indentured servitude, Mom, I said. I have already paid more than any daughter should ever be asked to. I have paid with my money. I have paid with my childhood. I have paid with my peace. The debt is paid. Martin picked up the pen. His hand was shaking. He looked at me, and for a second I saw a flash of the father I used to adore. The man who used to carry me on his shoulders before the weight of his own failures crushed him. Aura, he said. His voice raspy. If we can't get the loan in a year, if we can't buy it back, where do you expect us to go? It was the question that would have broken me a year ago. It was the question that would have made me tear up the contract and write another check. But I remembered the Christmas Eve alone in my apartment. I remembered the peace. I remembered the feeling of not drowning. I looked at him with compassion, but without compromise. Somewhere that does not cost my entire future to keep upright, I said. He held my gaze for a long moment. He saw that the wall was solid. There were no cracks left to exploit. He looked down at the paper. He signed. He passed the pen to Carol. She cried as she signed, weeping softly over the paper, mourning the loss of the fantasy she had lived in for so long. But she signed. Mr. Henderson notarized the documents with a series of efficient, rhythmic stamps. Clack, clack, clack. It was done. I stood up. I did not feel a surge of triumph. I did not feel the urge to cheer. I felt a profound quiet stillness. I took my copy of the lease. The rent is due on the 1st. I said. You can mail the check to the bank. They will handle the account. You don't need to call me. I walked out of the conference room, leaving them sitting there with the wreckage of their expectations. I took the elevator down to the lobby and pushed through the revolving doors out into the street. The air in Minneapolis was sharp enough to cut glass. It was 5 degrees below zero. The sky was a brilliant hard blue. I took a deep breath, letting the cold fill my lungs. I walked down the street, my boots crunching on the salt and snow. I thought about the house in Riverton. For years, it had been a symbol of my entrapment. It had been the anchor dragging me down. Now, as I walked toward my car, I realized it had changed. It was just a building. It was wood and brick and glass. It was an asset in a portfolio. But more than that, it was a monument to the moment I finally stood up. The year they told me not to come to Christmas was the year I finally stopped arriving for every other crisis they created. They had tried to punish me with silence, but they had given me peace. They had tried to exclude me, but they had set me free. I got into my car and started the engine. I had a meeting with Jasmine and Mr. Dalton in an hour. We were going to look at a new space for the mentoring program. I had a life to build. A life that belonged wholly and completely to me. I put the car in gear and drove away. And I did not look back.